Welcome to the Home Building Hub, your essential podcast guide to building your new home. Hosted by industry experts Colin Bischoff and Darren Brennan, this conversational podcast will help better educate you about all things new home building so you can avoid costly mistakes and enjoy your building experience to the fullest, no matter which home builder you choose.
Hey guys, before we kick off on the episode, I want to introduce you to a new phase of the Home Building Hub. We have decided to go back to school, that is SKOOL. We've created a community based on the back of a podcast we've been running for so long now. We've created a community for you, for all home buyers to jump in and get access to a whole range of tools, checklists, information, and most importantly, find other home buyers in there so you can follow people's journeys, you can share your own journey, and we're excited to build the most trusted community that is independent and objective in the whole country. So get in there, it's skoolschool.com. Look up Home Building Hub, download the app, come and say hi, and we will see you in there. Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Home Building Hub. You're with Colin and co-host Darren Brennan, as always. Today, Darren and team, we're going to talk about something I don't think we've covered in an episode before, Darren, but maybe touched on it during some others. We're going to talk about retaining walls. You see, people, they obsess over facades and bench tops and the kitchen island and all those sorts of things, but people don't quite put too much energy into the, the dirt dazza, So we want to talk about, what's happening underneath the slab, because it's probably one of the biggest surprises that you can come up against in terms of cost, particularly if you're on a block of land that has a little bit of fall or a lot of fall. And it is one of the fastest ways to end up in a bit of a dispute as well when it comes to neighbours that you haven't even met yet. So we thought we'd go through different things, I guess, even on a small amount of fall, often under a metre, that can trigger a retaining wall. So we'll talk to you about what a retaining wall is, what does it mean, how does it look, and how it's sort of dealt with. And then in terms of the pricing and the situations where it can and cannot apply, I suppose. So they essentially, they do affect where your house can sit. That's something we'll cover today, because it is something that I suppose, Darren, people don't quite understand. So making sure you understand the impact on your house and where it does sit because of a retaining wall requirement, something we'll cover. Sometimes there might be a smarter alternative as well. We can talk through a little bit of that. Who pays for retaining walls? Is it like fencing with 50-50 splits? We'll cover that. And I guess, and with all due respect, not to rely too much on the sales consultant, depending on their level of experience as to what that outcome would look like, because it's actually ultimately, I guess, it's a question for the engineer. Perhaps maybe a consultant who's done stuff with turnkey, as in landscaping, because those builders, which we will go in a bit more detail about, they are more used to dealing with or pricing up retaining walls up front as opposed to building the house and leaving the client at the end to sort of deal with it later, Daz. Isn't that right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is really pertinent on the understanding of the consultant. Often they've given a fixed site cost amount from the office, and that's just it. But they don't really know what's going to go on that site. So,
Mm.
I guess asking more questions around what that's going to potentially look like. Are retaining walls included? So there's no surprises later. Those sort of questions, and
Yeah.
they can be expensive. So we want to make sure that you're aware as the customer out there of what the potential risks are. So yeah, I think this episode will
Mm.
help cover a fair bit of that and, open your
Yeah.
eyes pretty wide to, retaining walls and what they're there for and how they work.
Yeah, so the episode's for, really anyone buying land, and obviously with the intention of building, it's definitely going to apply for you. Anything that's got what you think is flat, it's quite often, like we always hear every block's flat, but quite often you'll find there might be 7, 8, 900 mil of fall, or even some of them people say they're flat, but there's actually 1.5 meters of fall, and they don't realize. But when you look at it all day, every day, then it's pretty easy for us to see. But that can surprise people, can't it? So I guess we're just trying to educate a little bit. So a retaining wall, I guess, have you got something there to cover the definition, Daz, before you kick in? Or should we quickly explain
Yeah,
just really what it means,
it's
what it is?
there as part of the leveling of the lot, I guess, Cole. So retaining walls, because we predominantly build on slabs, and we'll talk further on that later. Um, you need to have a flat platform to build on. In order to get that, you often need retaining walls to hold the soil up that's around the block, and that could be because you've cut into the block, or it could be because you've filled the block. Um, and or both, depending on how your blocks are positioned.
Mm.
So, um, they're there to try and, I guess, make safe that environment of which you're building, and give a really good platform for the home to be able to build upon. That's probably the easiest way to explain it, and we'll talk through the different types of retaining walls and how they work. But, one bit that we're seeing, Cole, is as blocks get smaller and smaller, we're needing more and more retaining. So, used to be average block was 450 square meters in most areas, and regional areas significantly bigger, maybe 6, 7, 800 square meters. And then you could be on acreage, for example, whereas these days, the average blocks, and the blocks that are selling are all under 300 square meters, and people are trying to put house on as much of that as they possibly can there. The biggest house on the smallest block, essentially, is what people are really trying to do because it's about affordability. Um, but when that happens, that can also cause the need for retaining walls, So it's not just as simple as angling the soil back and battering it away, which is what we used to do. And again, there was about 5 or 6 years ago, it might have been more now. They did change the regulation because what some builders were doing was battering for meters. And I mean meters like 6, 7, 8 meters batters that were just crazy, without retaining that soil. And I still vividly remember one place I went to in Bendigo at the time where we didn't win the job, the builder I was working for, and I went back past that job because I'd heard about how big the batter was. And honestly, if you tripped at the front door, you would have done 6 somersaults before you hit the road because it was such a big batter. That wasn't a great outcome for that
Mm.
customer. It was a terrible outcome. Yet a builder built the house that way. So putting retaining walls in, making it more user friendly, particularly on blocks with slope, is really the key. But, understanding that also how a lot of homes were built on stumps previously. Um, so, they could really work with the land. These days, very few homes are built on stumps. Most of them are built on slabs. Um, you know, as we say, the land's smaller. We're really trying to maximize the use of the land. So, it's really key. Um, what else was I going to touch on there? Sorry, I lost my train of thought here, Cole. Um, Obviously with the slab, you need to have a level platform to build upon. So we need to be able to cut and fill potentially that block, even if it's only got a small amount of fall, to be able to actually get that to work. You've also got to make sure that you can't fill your block and put soil over the neighbour's property, right? That's not legal either. So you can't go, "Oh, I'll just batter right over onto my neighbour's joint, it'll be fine." No, you can't do that. So you've got to be able to operate within your boundaries of your block. So making sure that you're all over that is really the key. The important part is you don't need a steep block to require retaining walls, and that's really the myth. Even small amounts of fall and could be well under a meter, might be only half a meter, still may require a little bit of retaining, depending on where the fall is, depending on how your block's, positioned. Is it going across the block and your block might only be 10 meters, but there's half a meter of fall? Um, you know, or is it going up and down the block and the block's 30 meters and it's still got half a meter? Well, that's you're dealing with different amounts of
Mm.
fall in the way, the angle of which that's actually falling at. So, understanding what that is, the builder's got to create a flat pad to put their slab down on. So they'll be working through that. And hence why these days there's a lot more retaining walls out there, Colin, and people get
Mm.
surprised because they're not cheap, unfortunately.
Yep, that's correct. And it's also, I think, the understanding of what is it and why do I need it, and visualizing that for a client's quite difficult. So, I guess in terms of the definition, like most would know what the retaining walls like that. Usually, it's a timber sleeper, or two or three, and they're stacked, and there's like metal um,
Uprights, yeah.
uprights that the timber sits in, and that retains or holds the soil on the right or the left of it. And that's what really a retaining wall is. But you mentioned the term batter a few times there, Darren. So people's just understanding that basically instead of making the outside of your doorway, let's say your backyard door, your sliding door from your family room out to the backyard, Instead of making that nice and flat and having a retaining wall in front of you, it basically means no retaining wall, and the builder will just batter, as in leave the hill the way
Yeah,
it is,
slope it
so
down
you can, it's a slope down or up.
or up. Yeah,
And yeah, it's something that you don't think of, and most consultants don't even, I wouldn't say they don't care, but they don't understand themselves, because if they're not doing the landscaping, they don't really have to worry about it.
yeah,
They're
sure.
just pricing up your house on that block, and the rest of it, well, that's your problem. You know, we tend to deal with obviously turnkey in the world we're in, which means landscaping is factored in, and therefore retaining walls are factored in up front to cover off, I guess, the understanding that there's more than just the house wall. We've got to deal with what's around it as well. So that's what those two things mean. And as a client, it's quite difficult to understand that. And I think the third one, Darren, probably, like you mentioned, like a block that's 10 meters wide could have 500 mil of fall. Now that is a lot of fall,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
sometimes side fall, not necessarily back to front, front to back. It can be side fall from the right of the block is higher by 500 mil than the left of the block. So then you got to work out, well, how do I retain the right of the block? And cut and fill means, like, how much do we cut into that right side of the block versus fill the left side of the block? And these are things that builders and engineers work out, not sales consultants at the front end. So it's really important to ask the questions and get this information as much as you can allowed for, at least understanding if it is or it is not included in terms of retaining walls,
Yeah, for
because
sure.
you'll certainly need it. The blocks are smaller. You're going to need those retaining walls more and more now than ever,
Yeah.
because we see it every day, don't we, Daz? So um,
Obviously, it has impact
w-
on the positioning of the house on the block too, Cole. So maybe you can touch on what that's like too. You know.
yeah, it does. So maybe the smaller ones, it doesn't really impact bigger blocks so much, does it? Because
Yeah.
if you need to retain, like if you've got a big block, a lot of times you don't need to retain because you're just happy to have this gradual gradient of slope, like over the course of 10 or 20 or 30 meters. But if you've got 1.2 meters outside of your door to the side, or 3 meters to the back to your fence, then you're probably in a position where retaining walls can impact your design. So sometimes if you need to put a retaining wall down the right hand side of the house, then that can actually impact uh, how wide the house can be. It can push that house a little bit left or make you reduce the width of the house as a result. Sometimes that can happen, particularly those boundary to boundary ones. So my understanding, I think it's builder dependent, Darren, but um, a lot of builders can reinforce the garage wall
Yeah.
to act as a retaining wall, but they won't do it on like on a livable
Yeah, on a
or
living room or
habitable
yeah,
room,
room. Yeah.
living room, whatever. Um, so a walk-in pantry was the example we looked at the other day, and it could be a bedroom or whatever. You're not going to retain against where there's a window underneath. So these things can impact your design, and that's why it's really important for this episode for you guys to, I guess, not understand it in full detail, but at least be aware of it. It's probably the goal here. So I guess it's not just a cost line; it's something that dictates where your house can go and how your landscaping is going to look and how that pathway outside of your, into your backyard is going to look. Even the front yard, you think about those steep driveways sometimes you see, that is one thing, but accompanying that with a landscape that has maybe a step up and flattens out a little bit rather than just a steep hill that goes from your front door or front room down to the front of the block. Um, all these things come into play. So, drainage behind the walls, the setbacks, the room to work with, access for trades is another one you really have to consider. How can they actually get to that part of the house to build it
It's
with
funny on
with
some of those areas, Cole.
depending on the neighbours?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
think about on a double story, for example, if you've got scaffolding and the neighbour might already on that side where the retaining wall might be required, might already have a fence in, and you're going to cut below the fence to put your retaining wall
Mm,
in. So then you've got to move off the boundary somewhat. So you might have to come half a meter away from that fence, put your retaining wall in, but now you don't have enough room for the scaffolding to fit. So now you got to move the house over and make the house skinnier so that you can get the
yeah.
scaffold in. Like all these little bits and pieces come along that can trip you
Mm,
up. The other one is you might have eaves on your house, but now the eaves, particularly if there's big retaining walls, now the eaves are almost touching the retaining wall as the retaining wall comes up. You know, you might end up with a 1.5 or or 1.8 meter retaining wall, you've only got 2.4 ceilings. You can step off the retaining wall onto the roof because you've got eaves hanging out over there. Like and then there's no
Mm,
light getting in. So all these things need to be considered as part of,
yeah,
how that's best going to work. Are you going to get natural light into the room? Are you going to have, a retaining wall that's 1.5 meters high and then a fence that's 1.8 meters high sitting directly on top of it? And then you've got no light. You're 1.2 meters off the boundary
yeah,
or off the retaining wall,
yeah.
So those things are worth understanding so that, you might wanna move your house. You might wanna have a slightly narrower home so you've got a bit more room each side to let more natural light in. That might be on the north side where you're gonna get a lot of that natural light, but you've got a 1 point, or nearly, let's call it 3-meter high fence because you're retaining wall at 1.5 and another 1.8-meter high fence, you're at 3 meters. That's a long way up in the
Mm,
air to be sheltering that window from natural light, and you see that at times. So, yeah,
yeah.
getting the design right
And
is really important.
you might not want to buy that block. This
Absolutely.
is what we're trying to get you to understand is every block, like before you buy it, you should get a consultant with some experience to have a look. They'll do it for free. Like
Yep,
it's just understanding that if you've got a block of land that requires retaining walls, and like you said, Darren, that and it's got a decent amount of sidefall where the fence is already up and there's retaining wall underneath, has the developer benched and retained it so it's easy to come and build on? Or have they just left it as a hill for you to deal with?
yep,
These things factor in. So you think you got a good house price. The reality is you've got another, and this could be like $15,000, but it could be 40 or 50 grand in retaining, depending on how much falls there. So it's really significant. So please don't just go and buy a block because you think it looks good. It's really, especially if you think it's got a good view out the back, they're the ones you need to make sure that you're checking for how that house is going to sit on that block, where the retaining will be, because you're guaranteed. If you got a view, I can assure you, you're going to need plenty of retaining.
yeah,
It's
and you
just the
might
way
also have a
that
retaining
land
wall,
works.
Cole, that's that high that it actually now needs a fence or a safety rail so that someone doesn't just walk out the back and fall off 2 meters.
Yeah,
You're gonna your kids or someone trips over, they fall 2 meters and land on the ground below that, there's every chance they're severely injured, so all that stuff
yeah.
comes into play, and it becomes
I noticed in Queensland, Darren, when I lived in Queensland, and I don't profess to know anything about the regs there anymore because that was a long time ago. But I certainly, one of the things that took me back in Queensland was how hilly it was. And the developers there were so used to it that they benched and retained essentially everything in advance. So you could do site costs basically on flat land. But the retaining walls were huge. Like you were looking up at those things, like on the next block that was behind you, for example, it was the retaining wall was as high as the house.
yeah,
It was just crazy. So
and a lot of
some of
builders
those
also
areas,
won't build on those blocks, they'll just say, "Too much for us, that's outside our scope of works and what we're confident in doing," like some,
yeah,
you know You don't go to see a volume builder to build yourself a 30-story tower in the city. It's just different skill sets, and that's the point
yeah,
with a lot of these blocks with significant fall. You might be better off having a split level home. You might be better off looking at other
true,
alternatives or,
yeah,
or finding a different block. So talk to the
yeah,
builder, so you understand what their scope of works are. Don't just buy the block and then find out, I've got this great block now and it's got great views, but no one wants to build on it. So or it's gonna cost
yeah.
a
In
run to
Victoria,
fix
I
break
think
more.
they get stuck a bit more because it's not as common. But I know in Queensland, actually, New South Wales had a fair bit of fall too. The developer's so much more well versed, and their preparation of those lots are, more considered for the ultimate build outcome. So
Yeah,
it was
yeah, yeah.
easier for you to be a bit more confident that, it would be dealt with, and the pricing could be done pretty easily.
And I think
But I know in
Cole
Victoria you've got developers that are just leave it, it'll be right, and leave it to you. So that's all we're
yeah,
saying is just get
and
someone to have a
when you
look.
get a
Yeah.
bigger developer, and I'm thinking of there's an estate, called Averley that's owned by Stockland, and they've done a really good job of benching all of their blocks, and they've consulted with the builders to understand how the builder's gonna build on top of a retaining wall that's now got fill under it, but also next to a retaining wall on the other side because a lot of the fall's going up the hill. and it's
Mm.
cross-fall, and they've benched them and done a terrific job. So when they take real ownership around that and they work with the builders, then you get a great outcome. If they don't, then just leave it on a slope going up the hill, just gets messy. Everyone's dealing with with headaches, and you know, cost
Yeah.
of putting retaining walls is huge, and then all of a sudden ends up lots of blocks that aren't built on for years. You drive through some of these estates and there's vacant blocks forever, like
Yeah.
because no one can work out how to build on it or can afford to. So, yeah, they're the bits and pieces you wanna be mindful of when you're looking at a block with fall and understanding the costs and what retaining is required. You touched on earlier, Cole, timber retaining walls. Well, there's different options. So there's timber retaining walls, there's concrete retaining walls. There's also sometimes brick retaining walls required, and that could be either as part of the dwelling, for example, using a garage wall to retain, as you mentioned earlier, but it could also be some of the estates say, no, no, if it's in front of the house, we want to see a brick retaining wall because we want it to look nice. And so some
Mm.
estates will actually specify in front of the home needs a brick retaining wall, and behind the home do whatever you want. So again, understanding there's different types of retaining walls. Certainly, the most common would be the timber, most of the time, and concrete, depending on how big they get. Um, the concrete are obviously more robust, but they're also more expensive as well. So things to be aware of. Um, the retaining walls, when you're starting to put them in like we're talking about here, the engineers are starting to design that too. So they'll specify what it is, how big it is, where it needs to be, how deep the footings need to go, again, based on the soil conditions, because each type of soil will require different footing depth. So they'll specify that to make sure that that's going to be um, sufficient. And they'll also specify what needs to go behind the wall, what sort of drainage is required so that the wall doesn't get pushed over at some point by the pressure of the wall behind it. So, yeah, the engineer will look after all that. They will consider what's going on next door as well, and they have to. So you can't just bang a retaining wall in and have no consideration next door. The house is built there already. You might have to move away from that wall slightly or reconsider how that's designed. The engineers will look at all that for you, to give you the best advice and get the best outcome for you. But whether it's cut or filled, that whole interaction will take place. And yeah, it's a conversation for the engineers, and the builder will come back and sort of report back to you on that. It's not like going and doing a color selection, and it's a pretty simple process. I'd like that, thanks, that'll do. No,
Mm.
it's further consideration required. So yeah, what happens when you're landscaping, Cole?
Yeah, it's that's one we deal with a lot. I just sort of thinking through that because all of the quotes we do include turnkey and landscaping. So we have to put in our site costs, and separately we would put retaining wall figure, and we'll cover the stuff on costing after this sort of section here. But essentially, if your builder is completing your landscaping, it will be included in terms of the price, which will help. I guess getting it up front. One of the things that you noted here was like it's good to get your retaining walls and house understood at least and priced together, not to have them done separately. One done the house and then 12 months down the track when your house is finished, you're finding out that there's another bill coming your way. So you want to make sure that you have an understanding at the very least of what to expect and how that's going to look. Um, the landscaping trap you've got worded here, Darren, I think is is a pretty good one because I think that a lot of people think they can do this stuff themselves pretty easily, right? It's pretty common. Even just landscaping in general, people find, yeah, I'll just do it myself. It's pretty hard yakka for one, which is fine. But getting going down to Bunnings and getting all the its and the bits and the pieces you need to do it properly, and the machinery, hiring that out, and so it can cost a lot more than if you just got a builder to do it, because the builder's using a landscaping company that already has all that and that has a more effective, realistic rate as a result. So if landscaping is something that you're absolutely eager and keen to do, then you should do it because you can add your touches. But please understand you can expect to pay more in time and effort and money
Yeah.
as a result of that. We've seen that a few times. But if you do need retaining walls yourself, that's something that you're going to have to get a contractor in to do. and you'll have to have that discussion and work out where, I guess for the ultimate outcome of a positive landscaping outcome, I should say there, a positive landscaping outcome, it's best to work out your retaining walls, with someone who knows what they're doing, and then you can see what level's going to have grass and where it's going to have plants and things like that. Quite often, you see at the front of blocks, they've got actually retaining right there at the front, Darren, don't they? And then it's sort of as a step up, and then there's a flat section with a bit of garden, bit of grass, and there's another retaining wall that
Yep,
steps up again for a garden bed, and all of a sudden that's 400 mil, and done. That's a couple of sleepers, and it looks nice and it's clean, but you just need to sort of factor that in and understanding that that won't be part of your build costs with most builders. Yeah.
for sure. I guess the other thing you can also look at, on your site is talk with your builder, and if you've got a really experienced sales consultant who understands the true build process, and exactly what you need to be doing. Um, you might be able to look at things like deepened edge beams, and what that means is using, particularly on the low side, is to basically have a higher slab on that side essentially. And I could tell on my own house right here, right next to me here, we've got a deepened edge beam. So they took out needing retaining walls. It's a really good option. And yeah, it can be sometimes more cost effective, but it can also work with the land a bit better too. Um, but talk to your builder because sometimes you think it's going to be more cost effective, but it's not. And the outcomes, depending on where the fall is, if it's just consistent straight across the block, it can work really well. But if it's falling from back left to front right, then it can you might need retaining wall on one side to hold back the soil and retaining a wall to hold back fill on the other side of that because of where the cut and fill sits. So it can become a little bit tricky, but a deep and edge beam can be a really cool way to look at potentially using the site a bit more effectively, give you some,
Mm.
different options, but talk to your builder about that. And often they'll talk to you about that as well. Say, hey, listen, we're just going to put a deep and edge beam, means we're going to have 3 more bricks, but it'll take out the need for retaining walls, right? Or you could go up,
Yeah.
a meter in doing that. And they'll talk to you about the options in delivering that. But it's not something that's often spoken about up front when you're in those early consultations with a sales consultant. So, yeah, sort of ask a few more. Is there an alternative to retaining walls? Potentially. What does it look like? Could look like this. It could be a deep and edge beam that gives you some cost savings.
Yeah.
Cool.
In terms of the cost, and one thing I think it's probably where we're erring on the darkness of retaining walls, I suppose. But the truth is, they are there for a good reason, and they're there for I think, a good practical reason, but also aesthetically, it actually improves the way your landscaping can look, having retaining walls and things like that. There's the build component, what retaining you need to achieve the building, the way that you need on that block. And that's what consultants will have. They'll jump on a program they've got within the builder, and that'll forecast pretty much or predict what retaining walls are required to build that house. But those programs won't be factoring in landscaping. So that's where we're trying to get you to differentiate that.
Yeah, correct.
Is retaining for my building one thing, but is it going to look terrible when I now try and landscape the rest of it? And you may need a few more retaining walls to get that sorted. So it's just understanding that part and noting that they can be expensive, but I suppose also they can really make your overall outcome better, as I said, with the landscaping. Because if you've got landscaping on the side of a hill, and you got grass and it's not practical for the kids to play on or anything
Yeah,
like that.
correct.
But if you're actually leveling it out a little bit, putting some retaining walls on, there's a nice clean section of grass for the kids to play on. Now you got something that's actually it's worth the money. It's a better outcome in the end. So it's not discouraging retaining walls. We're just highlighting why you need them, what they are, how it looks, and I guess what the benefits are at the end of the day. So in terms of cost, it's really hard to tell you, give you a figure. I threw out a figure before, but sometimes you see 15 grand, sometimes you see 30 or 40. Depends a lot. But what I would say is we always see timber. They're the most common, the timber sleepers. Very rarely you see the concrete ones unless it's on a much, I guess, much higher build cost or it's on a much steeper block.
Yeah,
Then they
significantly
tend to
higher
use
wall.
the concreter ones. Yeah, concreted ones. Yeah. So it's something you just need to get checked out, make sure that you understand, I suppose is really the mission here, Daz. It's not something that we can just give you an approximate to put in your quote as a or in your mind as a heads up. But I would repeat from what we said earlier, if you've got a small tight block, don't think you're going to get away with no retaining walls. It's probably more likely the opposite.
Yeah.
Okay, so the smaller the blocks, the more likely you'll need retaining in this day and age, for sure. Even 500 mil can trigger retaining walls. It might only be minor, but still, it's there nonetheless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and depending on the soil type, will depend on how easy it is to excavate it out. It'll depend on how easy it is to bore the holes in to be able to put the uprights in. All those things come
Mm,
into consideration when the builder's pricing those retaining walls. So if you're on very sandy soil, for example, you might need a lot more concrete in those holes because as you end up digging a much wider hole because the sand just fills back in on the hole. So, there's different things to be considered as, as part of that costing of that, but they're not cheap.
mm.
But a
And it happens.
vital part in, the build and a vital part in your landscape. So, yeah.
We have, I mean, obviously we have heaps of examples, but one most recent one was one of our people who sell homes through us questioned the price of a package. So they've got same house, same size lot, up one end of the street, and then the other end of the street, same thing, but it was about 30 grand different. And they're like, well, what are you're trying to rip me off or what but it was because of the retaining and the fall. And that's literally what it was. It was just one factor of that block and the conditions of that block. Even though that block was actually priced, I think the same or maybe 3 to 5 grand cheaper than the one up the top end, the same street, there was about a 30K difference just in retaining wall needs.
I
Yeah, it
thought they're
was
going to come out
interesting,
in
but
front because they save a little bit on the land and it costs them more overall.
they thought we were trying to rip them off, but we are actually just putting the price in that ultimately we'll be paying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess who pays for the retaining wall? And we do see at times disputes with neighbours over retaining walls and where all that sort of fits in. But I guess one bit to be sure of is that the Fencing Act, which says if you put a fence up, then you have to pay for half, and the neighbour has to pay for the other half. And there's more to it than just that. But essentially that's the rules. Retaining walls doesn't fall under the same. So there's no act there in place so a lot of people just assume, well, we'll share the cost with the neighbour. That's not necessarily the case. It's about, who's responsible for that wall, why is a wall required, etc. So, as a general principle, the ownership comes down to cause, which side of the boundary the wall sits. So if it's on your side of the boundary, then it's more likely your cost. Um, you need to understand also that it's, uh, is it because of the cutting and filling of your block and how that's all coming into effect? But pretty much, if you're putting a retaining wall and your builder says you need it, you're paying for it. It won't be, can I get my
Yeah.
neighbour to share half the
100%.
cost? The
Yep.
interesting bit is on blocks that are very much straight up and down the block. I find them really frustrating, and I actually think developers should, if they're straight up and down, put the retaining wall or put retaining across the back and just flatten the block because you can be the first person to come in and you have to put retaining walls in to flatten out your block. And then the neighbor comes in and excavates all the soil out that's being held up by your retaining wall. It's just silly, right?
Yep.
One of the crazy
Yeah.
scenarios we come across is a retaining wall that's there to hold up nothing other than a little bit of soil, maybe 20 or 30 centimeters worth of soil between your retaining wall and the neighbor's retaining wall. Crazy.
Mm.
So anyway,
Yep.
um, the other bit is retaining walls generally over a meter require a permit. So, again, when your builder's getting their building permit, that's taking into consideration of retaining walls. If you're going to allow to do that afterwards and it goes over a meter, you're going to have to go and get a permit. Again, don't take that as gospel. Go and talk to your council, find out what the requirements are in your specific council area for a permit for a retaining wall, but generally speaking, a meter. And that could be you go up a meter, you could go back a meter and a half and go up another meter, and then they're considered two separate walls. But if you do a meter and go back a meter and another meter, that's considered one wall. So all these different intricacies. So talk to your council about if you're looking to do it yourself. I guess when it goes wrong, what do you do? Well, the I guess the first part is talk to your neighbour, understand what's going on. Most people can resolve issues that way. If that doesn't work, well, there's the free mediation service, which is um, the Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria, which is, so you can do that just between two neighbours, which is one way. You may end up a VCAT. Sometimes we don't want to see that, or go bigger than that, the magistrates court as a last resort. But it's always going to be cheaper and faster to sort out any of these issues between you and your neighbour, rather than taking it into any sort of legal action. So if you're concerned about retaining walls, go and have a chat about it. Take it pretty calmly, take a softly approach in there, and you'll probably find out it'll cost you less in the long run doing it that way.
Mm. Yep. And I think I'm yet to see a dispute from retaining walls. So it's not that common. Yet to see one in our space, and
I think where they
fencing,
where they
that
get
happens,
tricky
but
is if
yeah.
someone builds right on the boundary, and then there's disputes over, well, did you end up coming on my side of the boundary or the other? So if, for
Mm,
example, a re-establishment survey wasn't done, and then all of a sudden the retaining wall, it's 50 mil, 100 mil, 200 mil into the neighbour's property, and now you've chewed into their backyard, you might be well buying that backyard off them. You know, there's
yeah,
stuff,
yeah, absolutely.
and we
Yeah.
see that. So it's not often, but it does happen at times. So be really mindful. So again, building so close to a boundary on these really tight blocks, builder comes back and says, I need a re-establishment survey, and it costs what, 1,200, 1,500 bucks, whatever it is. You're better off paying that than finding out I'm buying land off my neighbour later.
Mm,
So, don't try
yep.
and skimp on that sort of stuff.
No, just try not to scare everyone, but yeah, it's not something that's that common. And re-estab surveys should be done on each one, and a builder will be putting your retaining walls inside your boundary anyway.
Correct.
All said and done. So it's more for if you're getting a really cheap contractor who's going to do it for you, and you're like, yeah, this is a deal of a lifetime. That's when you got to start looking out for it. And we're just sort of a reminder that retaining walls is just not really a DIY type thing. It's just something that you might need some professionalism um, to at least cast their eyes over it at the front end,
Yep.
and someone to make sure that they can do it properly, because it's a fair job. It takes a fair bit of work, good skill set to do it. So um, one of the things in terms of who to ask. So if you're just going through a builder, uh, one of the main builders, or any builder that's not doing landscaping for you, then one of the main questions to ask is just about retaining for the building, but also for your landscaping. And if you can, see if that consultant can grab an email from an estimator or someone internally who's a bit more of an expert on how it all looks and feels at the end of the day, who can give you a little bit more of an insight in terms of what the fall means, where the siding is, the slab design, all that sort of stuff. Um, it can really help, I guess, give you a more comfortable understanding up front. And they'll all have that resource. So the builder will have someone who's an expert who can give you just that little bit more than maybe
100%.
the sales consultant can. Just a little tip, I suppose, that can help you just narrow down, I guess, the unknown.
Yep.
Yeah.
I guess a few things, a few questions to ask. I guess we say before you sign, but that's before you sign the land contract and before you sign the build contract. So a few of those would be, what's the fall across my block, corner to corner? What does that look like? So ask for the engineering plan. If you're unsure how to read it, speak with a sales consultant. They should be able to help you if you're unsure that they're giving you the right advice. These days you can put it in ChatGPT. It's often reading it for you. There's different ways, right, that you can find out, but you want to find out how much fall is actually across my block. And that'll come off the developer's engineering plan if there's one
But be
available.
careful.
If not, um,
Mhm.
request a copy of a survey, see if you can get a soils test and survey done of the
Yep.
block, so you understand. Um, yeah, ask the question, will my build require retaining walls? And are they in the contract, or will they be via variation? So you don't get the surprise of a variation later. Um, if I'm getting landscaping done, how much extra, retaining will that require? And can the builder do that for you and quote that for you? So up front, maybe you're happy with the price and go ahead. Um, can you price deepen edge beams instead of retaining walls? Just ask the question. Will it work? Again, might not be a question that the consultant can answer, but they can go back to the office, talk to their design team, and find out about that for you. Um, where exactly does the boundary sit with regards to my retaining wall? So how close am I, to the boundary? Who's responsible for making sure that's in the right place? So making sure you've got that re-establishment survey if required, if you're very close to the boundary. You know, does the developer actually provide retaining walls? Are there some that are already showing on the engineering plan? They're already done for you. Therefore, you've got a flat platform. And is the wall being covered as just as a landscaping item? It's one sleeper high, and they're not worrying about putting it on the plans, and they're just going to do that because they're going to landscape it for you later, and therefore it doesn't have a permit, or is it part of the full plans that are submitted to council, or through your building surveyor, and it's got a permit against that retaining wall? So there's some of the things you probably want to be asking along the way, but they're certainly used a lot more than ever, Colin, retaining walls. They're a good thing. They make your block so much more usable, make your backyard so much, and your front yard so much more user friendly. Means you can go out the backyard and enjoy sitting out there and doing whatever you do in your backyard. But be aware that there's some additional costs that come with those.
Yeah. There you go. Thought that'd be a 20-minute episode, Darren. We're up to 40,
Only
just knocking on the door there. So
yeah, that's
it's one of those
good topic.
subjects. Yeah, just you get us started. We'll keep going because we want to help you and we want you to understand as much as you can, because a lot of what we discuss now is there's a fair bit of jargon, a fair bit of, I guess, words that we're using and that wouldn't quite make sense, and definitions that we're using like cut and fill and things like that. We respect that, but as long as you got the general gist of what we're trying to say, it will absolutely put you in a better position for when you go and get your quote and for your house, or particularly even the step before that, before you go buy that block, and put a
Absolutely.
signature to paper there, because we see that every single week. Even though we've been yelling and screaming this message, do not buy a block without going to someone from a builder
Yep.
who can help you look at the engineering plan first. We've been saying it from day dot for many years, Darren. But anyway, just trying to help. So hopefully you appreciate that. If you enjoyed it, if you got a nice 5-star review for us, jump on and do that for us on the platform you're on. Any feedback, questions, please, website's there. Just send them through. And there is also, if you want plenty of resources and things like that, jump on a school, SKOOL.com, search Home Building Hub and join the community there. And you'll see a whole bunch of resources that can help you with, plenty of money saving things, plenty of tips and tricks and all that sort of stuff for you to, as we always do, just to help. That's what we're there for. So cool. Outside of that, we look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.
Good on you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. And just our disclaimer, whilst we're all about providing value to you, this podcast should not be considered as legal or financial advice. It contains general information only, and you should seek out independent professional advice on your personal situation before making any legal or financial decisions.
1,